This is the Red Podcast.
Red Podcast, the marketing podcast for experts. If you've got a message to spread, you are in the right place. I talk about books, email marketing, podcasting, whatever it takes to get your message out effectively so you can make more money, reach more people, change more lives. I'm David Hooper. And if you've read my book, Big Podcast, you've heard me mention this girl. Here's the quick and dirty. When I was in high school, there was a girl at my church that I really liked, but she was really quiet and I didn't know her well. I just watched her and thought about her, thinking that she was reading my mind and somehow everything would work out. But I did get the courage to call her a few times, maybe 2 or 3 times. I don't know. And I was so nervous about calling her that I used to make flowcharts to keep the conversation going. I would say, "Hello, is Liz there?" Okay, if she is there, move on to the next flowchart. If she's not there, somebody else picks up the phone. Tell her David called. It was that kind of thing. I would talk to her. "Hey, Liz, it's David. Are you busy Friday?" If she says yes, ask her about Saturday. If she says no, ask her if she'd like to see a movie. It was pretty elaborate because, like I said, I didn't really know her and I was so nervous when the great talker that I am now. Something else I did when I was in high school is I always had a band going, but it wasn't really established. Various members coming in and out. Some people wanted it, some people didn't want it, but I always wanted it. And I had this opportunity. It was a dance or something like a dance. It was some kind of event at my church. And there were different youth groups, the youth ministries of these churches. They were all going to come to my church. And because I had that inside connection, it was my home field, I got us the gig. We were going to be the band there. So this girl, Liz, she was going to be there. And that was my big moment. And the night came. I walked out on the small stage that we set up. The drummer counted us off, click, 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 click. And I nailed it. I nailed those first chords of this song that we had written. And I looked up and she's there watching me. And it was fucking awesome. I'm just kidding. That did not happen. In fact, what did happen, it was pretty much the opposite. Drum went click, click, boom, doom, doom, doom. And we struggled through this cover of Jungle Love by the Steve Miller Band. And the gig sucked. It went downhill pretty quickly. We managed to get through it. And at the end of the night, this girl needed a ride home. And my friend, he was trying to be helpful. He was on my side. He said, "David can take you home." So she got in the passenger seat of my car. And I'm getting ready to back out of the parking lot. And she said, "You did good." That was a lie. She lived on the other side of town, and I didn't have my flowchart with me. So we just sat there in silence for probably 20 or 30 minutes, however long it took me to drive her home to the other side of town. And that was that. It was humiliating. I think even if it had gone well, it still would have been awkward for me. But it was especially bad after such a bad night. The next day, I got a call. It wasn't from her. It was from an adult from one of the other churches who was there. I'd met this guy, and I think he was calling me because he felt bad for me. And I bring up this story to say, this is what happens when you don't prepare. You blow opportunities. You have people feeling bad for you. You're probably blowing future opportunities. I mean, who knows what would have happened had I done well there? Maybe nothing, just a high school dance, but certainly better than I got that night and better than I got the next day. You would think that going through something like that I would have learned that lesson by now, that it is important to prepare. I have not. When it comes to live presentations, I still keep things pretty loose. I talked about my ability to do live presentations before on this podcast. I talked about having a panic attack on stage. Some of that probably, if I want to be honest with myself, was because I didn't prepare. But here's the irony. That event was the one that I had prepared for the most ever. I had been through that presentation so many times. I was ready. I knew the slides. I knew the content. It was changing a bit, but more or less, I knew the content. I could have gotten out there without slides, without a script, cue cards, anything. And I still could have gotten through it more or less. I think part of the issue of why that didn't work for me, because taking it back when I was doing this gig or the previous speaking engagements that I've done, my inability or maybe preference not to prepare, it has caused me to be great on the fly. When I'm presenting something, it's not like I don't know it. I'm just not great at keeping something word for word, or when I was a musician, note for note. My school career was pretty much like that. I learned how to get by based on wit, based on skills that I had developed because I didn't prepare, based on making that forehand that I did have so good, people didn't realize that I didn't have a backhand. Good on the fly, good at figuring out ways around things, not great at the brute force that it takes to memorize something, or at least that's what it feels like to me. So I had to work around that. Something you may know, maybe you're experiencing this. A lot of successful entrepreneurs, very successful entrepreneurs, have dyslexia. Richard Branson, great example of this. Why do you think that is? Why do so many successful entrepreneurs, way more than the general population, have dyslexia? One of the reasons may be, this is just a theory, it is because dyslexia forces you to work around things. It forces you to adapt. And you take that skill and you learn how to have adaptation to other areas of your life. Lots of entrepreneurs, probably more than the entrepreneurs that have dyslexia, have ADD. That's the same thing. It forces you to adapt. I may have that. My wife thinks I do. She thinks I have the inability to focus. And that would absolutely explain why I can't sit down and learn songs or memorize speeches like I probably should. A side note, working in the entertainment industry, I've known a lot of people with substance abuse problems, alcoholics, drug addicts. They got the same thing going on. They are very good at surviving. They'll mess things up in one way, but get so good at covering that thing that they've messed up that they're extra powerful in another way. You see a lot of alcoholics that are great salesmen. Again, just a theory, but that could come because that is their way of coping. And here's my point from telling you all this. All problems have their upside. Here's a podcasting one. You're not good at the tech stuff like editing? It forces you to get good at not making mistakes. Or if you're not good at editing, you don't enjoy editing, you sit down through a few edits. If you don't enjoy it, that will at least motivate you to get good at delivering your message without editing. That's the big point here. When you run into an issue, look for the good. When something's in your way, go through it, over it, under it, blow it up, go around it. We're in the middle of this right now. You may be affected by this because you are an expert trying to spread a message. If you were doing that 2 or 3 months ago via a live setting, you can't do that right now. Thanks to COVID-19, coronavirus, whatever you want to call it, that is not an option for you, not a safe option. You know what is an option? Podcasting. And maybe you're like me. Maybe you know the material inside and out. You just need a little bit of motivation to deliver that message in a different way. Maybe it's doing it via web. Maybe it's writing a book. All of this is available to you. I was really inspired by the last episode, number 265. James Hayden, he talked about prepping his speech for TEDx. A lot of work. Somebody approached me about doing TEDx once. I knew one of the organizers. He said, "Man, you'd be great at this." I'm like, I don't know. Would I? And listening to James, on one hand, I think, no. I don't want to go through that much prep. I'm not made for that prep. But hearing him explain it, seeing that he has done it, now I've got a better understanding of what's involved. I know that he's done it. He's somebody that I could go to ask for help in doing it myself. Now I'm thinking, yeah, maybe so. Maybe so. That kind of thing is very inspiring to me. I love hearing stories about people who are successful at something because it shows what's possible, but they also share insight about how that thing was accomplished. So why not you? If you've been derailed by coronavirus, COVID-19, anything, why not figure out a way right now, while we've got all this downtime, to work around it? If you're a speaker and there are no live events being booked, people are afraid to get together, why not do Facebook Live? If you need help with podcasting, the book I mentioned at the very beginning of this episode, Big Podcast, if you go to bigpodcast.com/book, you will see it there. There's more information for you, as well as some of the other stuff that I can do to help you work around these issues and possibly come out better than you were before. Jeff Brown, he's got a podcast called Read to Lead. Jeff was a broadcast radio host for 26 years. Broadcast radio is a sweet thing, but it's changing. Jeff saw that it was changing, ventured over into podcasting. He's got a podcast called Read to Lead. It's a great podcast. If you read business books, you want to hear from those business book authors, readtoleadpodcast.com is the website. I wrote this article about Jeff for my blog, and that's also at bigpodcast.com. It talks about his transition, which was not only from broadcast radio to podcasting, but now, because of his podcast, he's got a book coming out. He's not just interviewing other business authors, he is a business author himself. That is the opportunity available to all of us. And sometimes these opportunities would never have happened had we not run into a roadblock. All of these things that I've mentioned, bigpodcast.com. A great page for you to go to at bigpodcast.com is bigpodcast.com/subscribe. If you are not subscribed to this podcast, Red Podcast, the marketing podcast for experts, you can do it there, bigpodcast.com/subscribe. I've got 3 buttons for you. One for iPhone, if you listen to podcasts via iPhone. If you're on an Android device, got a button for you. And if you like an old school RSS feed, I've got a button for you, bigpodcast.com/subscribe. And while you're there, if you really want to go deep with me, reach out. Let's get a podcast for your message. Happy to talk to you about that. Bigpodcast.com. Thank you for listening to Red Podcast, the marketing podcast for experts. More thoughts from me and some other great people coming up in future episodes. So I hope you subscribe, and I hope to see you on the next episode of Red Podcast, the marketing podcast for experts.